Hello out there, and welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. I am Caleb, joined by Alan, and what you guys don't know is I am dancing to that song every time while the intro is playing, just silently bopping over here. Yeah, I don't know. That was some like commercial-free music track that I found a long time ago, and I like it. I'm for it. All right, there's a pretty big game this weekend. South Carolina is hosting LSU. Number 16 LSU, I think, is the last I saw. It kind of bounces around depending on which poll you're looking at. But yeah, 16 LSU. Pretty big opportunity here to start 3-0, to start 2-0 in the SEC schedule, still be at the top, to win a home game in front of College Gameday and all of the key announcers for ESPN, in front of a pretty important recruiting list, especially if you're looking at 2026 recruiting, which I'll have that full list out tomorrow in the weekly recruiting wrap up. But several in-state wide receivers that you really, really want, like Jordan Gidron and Donovan Murph, a few four-star edge players from surrounding states. Yeah, I mean, it's important. The names are still coming in. Honestly, a lot of people want to be a part of it because it's College Game Day. Is College Game Day going to get rained on? Let's start there, because I do know that there's a tropical storm hanging out over there somewhere.
There's a chance. The weather's looked bad most of the week. It's actually raining right now outside my apartment. I'm just pulling up the weather app now for for Saturday morning. It says 15% at 9 a.m. So you're not out of the woods, but it's also better than it's been most of the week. It looks like the rain's not quite going to be there at game day time at kickoff. It's going to be humid, though. It is 72% humidity at kickoff right now and not much better in the morning. So if you're going to be out there, hydrate. And I don't just mean the alcohol kind of hydrating. It's going to be hot. It's going to be sticky. It's going to be muggy. It's hopefully not going to be a storm like the Old Dominion game, but it's going to feel like the Old Dominion game just in terms of just being outside, especially if you're going to the game and you're going to be sitting on metal bleachers for 3 hours, 4 hours.
So maybe there's going to be some mud left over for some, people jumping in the mud and stuff in the morning. But hopefully not actively downpouring. That sounds good. Just a quick reminder to anyone that hasn't already heard it from everyone else, but get there early. The traffic's going to be not good. They did move College Game Day to Gamecock?
Yeah, Gamecock Park, which is across the street from Williams-Brice.
And then my understanding is for the last hour for College Game Day, they're going to move inside the stadium. So that'll give you plenty of time to get to your seat. But yeah, still definitely get there early and enjoy those refreshments early as well. 6 a.m. at a minimum.
I mean, Shane Beamer's basically giving people a license to party early in the morning. He had a quote Tuesday in his press conference where he said, hey, we can't have empty seats at kickoff. He didn't say it, but he's referencing, I think, like A&M in 22 when Leggett runs the opening kickback and the stadium's a third empty because there's fair traffic. And he said, hey, if you have to wake up at 6 a.m. to tailgate to be in your seat by noon, then wake up at 6 a.m. and tailgate. Just
get your.
He's giving you a license to drink all day. Is basically what Shane Beamer's doing, and you guys should appreciate that.
Yeah, you can't drink all day unless you start when the sun rises.
That's right. That's just math.
Get your Chick-fil-A biscuits. Get your mimosas. Sounds like a good time, honestly. So let me throw you some trivia at you real quick before we get too much into the game. When was the last time South Carolina started 3-0 to start a season?
I'm gonna say 2012.
Did you already know that?
No, but I knew it wasn't during the Muschamp era. And I remember they lost the Kenny Thrill game in 14 week 1. So it's pretty much just down to one of the 3 Clowney years. And that was the one where they 6-0, I think, in 2012 they started.
Yep. So that was the last time, 2012. They started 6-0 and they lost to
it's LSU, right?
LSU.
Death Valley.
Yep, in Death Valley. That was actually a really brutal stretch of schedule, which we'll see in the middle of this year as well, where they had Georgia at home and then they had to go to LSU and to Florida in back-to-back weeks. So ended up, that's the famous Aaron Murray deer in the headlights game against Georgia, but then
also a game day game.
Yeah. but then lost to LSU the next week in Death Valley. So we'll see how it turns up this time. There was one other opportunity for them to start 3-0, and that was 2017 under Muschamp. A lot of people probably remember this game as well. They started off the season strong with a win over NC State and Mizzou. Were set up. They didn't have game day, but it was a SEC Nation, or it was whatever. It was a night game, big game. Stadium was full, and you lay a clunker against Kentucky and lose 23-13. So it's been a long time since you actually capitalized on an early season opportunity. But you get one now, and it sounds like Shane Beamer earlier this week at the press conference has kind of realizes that. He talked a lot about game day, talked a lot about starting fast, not drinking your own Kool-Aid, I suppose. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of flipping the script on the other seasons we've seen in the Beamer era thus far, but you need to complete the landing here this week. Am I crazy to think that this is a game that South Carolina should win? Maybe we should start there. I know on paper you're playing against the number 16 team in the country. You're playing against a team that has LSU on the front of their jerseys, which is always kind of a scary proposition. But when I look at the matchup, ever since I've looked at the matchup, really since I looked at it over the summer, it feels like there's some things that kind of work out kind of well, at least on paper, for South Carolina to be able to pull the upset. What do you think?
I don't know if I'd use the word should. I think that should is what I think of when you're playing Akron, when you're playing Old Dominion, when you're playing Vanderbilt. I don't know if I would go as far as saying like, obviously it'd be disappointing if you're, but like it would be like a failure or unacceptable if you don't win this game. I don't know if I put it in that bucket necessarily, but I definitely, we talked about it all summer. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago. We were doing like our last looks of the season, making upset picks. Like LSU is there for the taking. Like this is still a very talented team. It's LSU. It's always going to be when you play that program. But there's things to be exploited there. There's holes. You got it at home, obviously. It's not what we're going to be talking about the week you play Ole Miss or Alabama, where it's like, how many breaks do you need to stay in the game in the fourth quarter? And then I don't think you need to force 5 turnovers to win this game. Maybe that's the way to approach it, but
yeah, let's start to break down some of those matchups. I think on probably the most interesting matchup of the game, considering how the first 2 weeks have gone for South Carolina, is how are the edges going to hold up against LSU's tackles? In the preseason, we thought both those tackles are NFL level tackles. I mean, they probably still are. They haven't had the strongest start to the season. Really, LSU's offensive line in general has struggled, especially in the run game, but they have held up pretty well for Garrett
they haven't allowed a
Nussmeier.
sack yet this year. I will say that.
Right. Yeah, they've held up well in pass blocking. Garrett Nussmeier actually leads the country in touchdown passes with 8 touchdown passes through the first 2 weeks. And one of those weeks was against a pretty good USC team in a loss. So it's not like it's just been cupcakes the whole way either. Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited to see how South Carolina's veteran defensive front holds up or creates pressure or tries to make an impact the way that they have the first 2 weeks against definitely a step up in competition compared to what you saw against Old Dominion in Kentucky.
I mean, yeah, I'm comfortable calling this. LSU is not the best team South Carolina is going to play this year, but it is the best offensive line South Carolina is going to see all year. And I would include Ole Miss, Alabama, whoever you want in there. The left tackle for LSU, Will Campbell, Beamer mentioned the stat in his presser, and I looked it up, and it's true. He's played over 1,700 snaps in college football and allowed 3 sacks. And 2 of them were the guys who were first-round draft picks, Will Anderson and Jared Verse. That doesn't mean it's impossible. That doesn't mean you can't get home, but he's going to be a top 10 pick in the draft. And the other tackle, Emory Jones Jr., is going to be a first-round pick. So it's best on best for sure. I think the main question I have is, how do you go about creating pressure, right? Can you get home with 4? You going to try to go 5? How does Clayton White approach this? How would you approach this? Put your Clayton White hat on.
Yeah, I mean, last week they obviously were able to just rush 4. They even got to the quarterback with 3 a couple times, which really allowed things to open up nicely on the back end, dropping back into coverage. You're going to need to cover well this week. They don't have Malik Neighbors over there. They don't have Brian Thomas Jr. over there, but they still have some good wide receivers, some talented wide receivers, and some wide receivers that have made plays in the early season. I think you have a good DB group. You might still have some questions at corner, although I thought Bakari Swain looked really nice last week. He's probably, to me, between Bakari Swain and Judge Collier, maybe Judge Collier, you trust to sort of be in the right place. But Bakari Swain, if he is in the right place, has more athletic upside, is maybe a good way to put it. I think we'll probably see both. I think you're going to have to blitz at times. I really don't see you getting
I'm
quite
with
as
you.
much pressure on the edges as you have in the first 2 weeks. I think you got to pick your spots for it, obviously, and definitely still cover on the back end. But I think you do need to take some opportunities and some obvious passing downs to send some of those linebackers who have shown in the early season that they can get there with an aggressive sort of mindset. I also think if you can create any pressure at all on the outside and start to pull those guards into some double team situations, or have to chip a little bit or something, then you could get some pressure from your defensive tackles who are pretty athletic. I mean, we've seen Doc Hemingway make sacks. We saw
TJ
TJ
Sanders had a big break last week.
Yeah. So I think that this matchup still looks pretty good on paper for the Gamecock defense. Another thing we haven't even talked about yet is LSU's top running back is out for the year.
Yep. I was going to get to that.
They're starting a freshman DB, or they're playing a freshman DB in that running back rotation. So they really haven't had much of a semblance of a run game this far in the season. So they're already kind of one-dimensional going into this game. The question is just, can you stop that one dimension?
Well, that's what I wanted to get to. Just kind of ask, I think all of us would agree LSU is going to throw the ball more than it passes, but how one-dimensional is one-dimensional? Because we ran through the stats last Sunday on the podcast. We were just kind of taking an early look at LSU off the back of its game against Nichols last week. Obviously a game, won by 3 scores, but no discernible running game at all. 21 carries for 68 yards as a team, 19 for 55. If you take out the quarterback runs, no sacks allowed. Is LSU just going to show up and say, all right, Garrett, throw the ball 50 times? Do they try to get the running game going? I don't even think you can sell play action when your running game has been this bad through 2 weeks. They didn't even really run the ball well against Southern Cal either. Is this an 80% passing game for LSU, or do you think they're at least going to try to get a run game going early?
Yeah, so I know that's a question you asked Death Valley Insider's Jefferson Powell. We have a pretty good article on Gamecock Scoop from this morning, actually, that you can go check out with some of those questions and answers from our Rivals affiliate over there, the LSU affiliate. And he insisted that they are going to try to run the ball. I mean, I guess you kind of have to, right? You have to at least try to set up some things.
Snap the ball 65 times, Nussmeier's not going to end the game with 65 pass attempts. I know that, but I'm just trying to figure out where the line is.
To me, it's somewhat it is dependent on how South Carolina starts this game too, right? If it's an ugly sort of rock fighty game throughout, then maybe they will keep trying to run it just to keep things honest, to keep the clock moving, all those sorts of things. But I think if South Carolina gets an early lead, it wouldn't surprise me if LSU abandons the run. It is their strength. And then, do you think South Carolina's secondary can hold up? I don't know how I feel about the question. To me, this is probably the strongest passing attack since 2022 against Tennessee. Obviously, we know how that turned out, but that was a weird night in general, right? That was like a buzzsaw situation.
You still gave up 38 that night for where this is a much better defense than that one, I think, but still.
Yeah, definitely better up front. Secondary's more, definitely more veteran at safety. I think you feel good about all your safeties and your nickel. Your corners will be the question. Can your corners hold up? If you end up putting them on an island at all, whenever you do send those blitzes we were talking about, do you think Swain, Collier, Fortune, whoever else might end up there can actually hold up in some one-on-one scenarios? I think they can, but I guess it depends on what hold up means to you. Could they hold LSU to 20 points? I think so. Are they going to hold them to 6 points like they did against Kentucky last week? I don't know that that's particularly realistic to expect.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought that up, the kind of the numbers there. And Yes, I think South Carolina's defense will be able to do some things in this game. Yes, I don't think it's just gonna get run off the field. And I wrote this tomorrow for my final preview. It's still college football in 2024. LSU's offense is very good. 2 NFL tackles. Again, probably like at worst, the third best quarterback you're going to see all year behind Dart and Milrow, and maybe even better than that. Even if South Carolina defense plays well, LSU is going to probably score into the 20s in this game. Maybe like a really good game would be like holding them to 17. And that's very much on the optimistic side of it. So that to me brings it to the other side, which is like, okay, they're not going to hold them to 6, like you said. They're not going to hold even probably the 19, like Old Dominion. South Carolina is going to have to score some points in this game. They're going to have to get into the mid-20s probably to win this game. Do you think this offense can do that is the question.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit on Sunday about what Nicholls State did to this LSU team on the ground, both their quarterback and their running back on the ground. What was the running back's name? He had a great name. Do you remember?
I will pull up the box score because I do remember it was a very Louisiana name, if I
It was
remember
a
correctly.
very Louisiana name. Anyway,
they ran for 150 yards as a team. I remember that number.
Exactly. So, a big question to me is Lenore Sellers healthy enough to be a threat in the run game? And if he's not, how much do we see Robbie Ashford in like a Wildcat situation, which wouldn't surprise me if we do. I think South Carolina really needs to be stubborn about getting the run game going. If they can, like you said, LSU does have the potential to score some points quickly. So, you need to play some complementary football like we saw last week where the defense is holding up long enough in the first half that you can really get some things going on the ground if you're the offense. And yeah, I think that's where LSU is exploitable. They are still pretty good along the defensive front, but they're not, 5-10 years ago LSU up front. They're not when they come off the bus. I don't know. It just doesn't have that same like, oh my god, who is that guy feel. Now, granted, you do still have what's his name? Where did it go? Harold Perkins on the other side, and he is still going to make an impact. But as far as all the way across the line, I do think that there's an opportunity to run on them now. So far this season, South Carolina's had some trouble getting Rocket Sanders going outside of a couple of situations. But I mean, you played. I would say Kentucky's front, just their front, might be better. Last week might be better than LSU's is this week. So I do think there's some opportunity there. And then if you can control the pace of the game, then yeah, I think you definitely have a chance to score some points.
Colin Guggenheim is Nicholls running back who went for 2 touchdowns, including a 67-yarder last week.
Guggenheim,
start with that.
Yeah.
On to this week. I think the interesting thing, I wrote about this a little bit this afternoon on Gamecock Scoop, if you're subscribed, is this is the Blake Baker defense. Blake Baker, who was the last 2 years at Missouri, obviously Missouri's defense completely took South Carolina out of the game both times. And even though it doesn't have any relevance on this week, if you're really old school, you'll remember Blake Baker was coordinating Louisiana Tech's defense in 2017 when that team probably should have beat a Will Muschamp South Carolina, if not for a last-second Parker White field goal. So you know what you're going to get with Blake Baker. Beamer mentioned it. They don't disguise a lot. They don't, drop in and show things. They're just kind of going to put their corners on islands and dare you to throw the ball deep to the boundary, and you're not going to be able to do that. Can you? I think yes. I don't think there's an NFL corner on LSU's roster right now. Certainly doesn't scare you the way like LSU's offensive line does or the quarterback play. But this is where, again, you need your receivers to start getting some separation, to start pushing the ball down the field. That's not even getting into the question of like pass protection, holding up for Lenore Sellers. But Mazio Bennett looked better last week. But even with that, what was it, 3 catches? Like Jared Brown had 4 catches for 50 yards. That was your leader in receptions. You're still, I don't know if you're at a point where you can throw the ball. You're going to complete the ball 20 to 30 times in a game right now. And that's, again, where I think you're completely right, is you have to get the running game going. And specifically, you need to start moving some bodies up front, because I know the stat was going around this week that Rocket Sanders leads the country in tackles broken. Well, he only has to do that because there's guys in his face pretty much as soon as he takes the carry or takes the handoff.
Yeah, I mean, he's had some impressive runs that ultimately netted for 2 or 3 yards so far this season for sure. And he's probably going to have to do that some on Saturday too. Let me give you some horror show numbers, and actually they're your numbers that you put in your article that you wrote earlier. But across 8 quarters of football against Baker-led defenses, South Carolina scored 22 points. So across 2 games, 22 points, 11 points a game, 1 touchdown, so half a touchdown a game, and 5 field goals, and put up only 489 yards of total offense. So what is that, like less than 250
245 a
per
game, yeah.
game? Yeah. So it's going to have to be better than that. If you're looking on the bright side, I don't think that LSU, at least currently where they're at right now, is to the level of those Mizzou defenses the
What
last
a
2
sentence,
years,
by the way.
right? I do think this also plays into, and we've talked about this really since the offseason, catching LSU this early in the schedule plays to your advantage, because I do think that defense is going to just keep getting better throughout the year. You hope that it doesn't all click into place this week in Columbia. But yeah, I mean, I'm having a really hard time guessing what the final score of this one is going to be, because on one hand you have an LSU offense that has the ability to score points through the air, but you have a South Carolina defense that has been very good thus far in the season and that we think is a strength of this team. On the other hand, you have an LSU defense that, is led by a coordinator that has given South Carolina a lot of trouble. But LSU's defense is probably a little weaker as far as the two sides of the ball go. And South Carolina's offense has been inconsistent, but last week she at least showed the ability to break open some plays. And when I combine all of that into a pot, I'm like, this could either be a really ugly game or this could be like a 34-30 game.
So here's the one thing I will say, if you're South Carolina, is you can't get knocked out in the first quarter here. And obviously that goes without saying, that's any football game. But I guess what I mean by that is, it's not, I think we're both in agreement that LSU is going to hit a few plays in the passing game, hit a few explosives. You can't let those be in the first quarter. I think there's I don't want to say likely, plausible scenario where LSU gets the ball first, scores on the script, South Carolina goes 3 and out, LSU hits an explosive. And even if LSU is not going to go score 50 points and they are only going to end up at the 30s, all right, well, it's 14-0 in 6 minutes. And then crowd's out of the game. You have to kind of abandon the run. Like, I think so much of this is just dragging this game out. And also, let's face it, it kind of went viral after they played Southern Cal in Vegas. LSU has not finished well in the Brian Kelly era. They don't finish games well. They gave up a touchdown drive right at the end of that game. They had the lead in the fourth quarter and lost. That's Brian Kelly pounding the table in his press conference saying they keep making the same mistakes in fourth quarters. If you get this thing to the fourth quarter close, I think you like your chances, just given what LSU's done and finishing out close games the last 2 years and change. But you can't get knocked out early. And that's, I think, more plausible in this game than last week, but in most of the ones on your schedule, just because LSU's offense can be so explosive and they are capable of 2-play scoring drives.
Yeah, I guess when I think of South Carolina's defensive backs, I think there's a strong unit. I think that they hold up really well in the run game. They love to come up and make plays in the run game. I think they're good at creating turnovers. That's something that they've done pretty consistently over the last couple of years. I don't know if I think of them as elite cover options if Nussmeier has all day to sit back there and those wide receivers have all day to run around. So I do think creating pressure is going to be essential. Granted, South Carolina, you would say that that's kind of a strength. You mentioned the weather earlier. I think the fact that South Carolina has been rotating so many players along the front, whereas LSU's offensive lines played most of their snaps up to this point in the season. Maybe that plays a factor if you can keep it ugly into the second half, like you said. Maybe South Carolina's defense has some more opportunities to be fresher down the stretch than that offensive line, and some things happen there. It's going to be interesting. The guy, sorry, I said his name earlier, Jefferson Powell from DeathValleyInsider.com on Rivals. You asked him basically like what it's going to take for South Carolina to pull the upset. And I thought his answer was interesting because I don't know if I necessarily agree with it, but I want to hear what you have to say. He says, if LSU loses this game, I'd say we'd probably be writing about a lackluster defensive effort from the Tigers, where South Carolina's Lenore Sellers had a coming out party at LSU's expense. Is that the only way that you see an upset happening? Because I don't know if that's really what it takes. To me, that sounds like you need Lenore Sellers to have the best game of his career thus far.
Yes,
And
I would agree with that.
maybe that's true. Does he have to be elite? Does he have to do it by himself? I don't know if I agree with that point, I guess.
No, I don't think. I don't think he can. I don't think he's at a place 3 starts into his career where he can do that. And no, I don't think he has to. Again, like I, if you win this game, to me, what I'm getting at when I asked that, well, I wanted his opinion, but what I think is your secondary plays well. That's kind of what I think. I do think the upfront stuff's gonna mostly be a wash. I think Stuart Kennard are gonna win their fair share, but you're still going against NFL tackles. They're gonna win most of them. That's how pass protection works. Like, I guess like a good pass rush win rate, like a really good pass rusher, 15 to 20%, right? Of dropbacks. That's when they're gonna beat their guy. And obviously that's enough to, if you get home 1 out of every 5, that's a lot of sacks, but maybe it's 10%. Maybe 1 out of every 10, each D lineman's going to win theirs, have a chance to get an Usmeyer, flush them out of the pocket, whatever. That's still a lot of time you're going to have to cover, or you're going to have to deal with a pretty good passing game. And to me, that's kind of where the game is. All right, Nick and DQ, you're juniors now. This is the best passing game you might see all year. This is you. O'Donnell Fortune, this is you. And again, that's not holding them to 44 passing yards like last week. No one's saying that's going to happen. But can you keep a lid on the explosive plays? Can you force LSU to have to drive 8, 9, 10 plays when you're rotating bodies and they're not? That to me is where the game is. And if South Carolina wins, I'd say it kept a lid on explosive plays and did enough elsewhere that Stewart and Kennard getting more canceled out this week than they will most other weeks didn't cost them, maybe is the way to say it.
In lieu of not overlooking something that we overlooked last week, Garrett Nussmeier has not started that many football games.
That's true.
Is it fair to say that this is the toughest environment that he will have had to play in thus far?
I am going to look at his game log because I don't want to. It's definitely the toughest one he's started in.
Yeah,
because that was basically a home game in Vegas, and obviously they were actually at home in Baton Rouge last week. And he started the bowl game last year when Jaden Daniels declared for the draft, but it's a bowl game; it's a neutral site.
Right.
So just looking back through his game logs now, this is great audio for everybody listening. He did play a little bit at Alabama last year. It was only 10 pass attempts. It was in backup. So he has played in Tuscaloosa. Other road games at Missouri, 2 pass attempts. At Mississippi State, 3 pass attempts. That's both mop-up duty. Let's see. At A&M, 1 pass in 2022. Home game. At Auburn, 6 passes. This will be he's played at Alabama, at Auburn, at A&M, but he has not started or, thrown the ball more than like 6 times in any of those. So I'm going to say yes, just because it's the first time he's had to do a full game in an environment like this.
Right. He started 2 neutral site games with the bowl game and the season opener, and then a home game against Nichols. Yep. So, yeah, I do think it will be interesting. And this goes back to your earlier point. Can South Carolina make something good happen early on defense, like it has the past couple of weeks? And if it can, does that get him out of sync early? And I think if it does, then game on. I think that's definitely going to be something to watch in the first quarter. Can you keep the crowd in it through the first half?
Yeah, and to me, really, you just need to settle in. Shane Beamer talked a lot about, it's kind of what we started the show with, but not letting the emotions get the best of you, not, drinking your Kool-Aid all week. And he said tonight on Carolina Calls that it's awesome. It's cliche, but he's right that, it's awesome that game day's here and we're going to have, big crowd in Game Park and all that stuff. And the crowd makes an impact, but once the ball gets kicked, it doesn't really matter what company has a TV studio set up outside the stadium. It's still football. And at that point, yes, you are going to need to keep the crowd in the game early. I'm interested. This is just kind of one of those minute things, but Beamer, last week, South Carolina wins the toss, takes the ball, which I agreed with. And I think I said in our live chat that we do every week that you don't want this Kentucky front, wins the toss and deferred, because you don't want this Kentucky front on the field any sooner than it has to be. You trust your defense, get a stop, set the tone. If you win the toss this weekend, are you putting your offense on the field this time to try to get at what you see as a weak point for LSU, or are you just kind of keeping the chips in the middle of the table on your defense, saying, you got us here last week, let's get the crowd loud early with LSU possession? It doesn't really affect the game that much, but it's just
Yeah.
something I've been thinking about. If you have an opinion.
I think you still defer. I think your defense is your strength, and you got to keep leaning on that strength until it proves otherwise. This could be the week that it proves otherwise, because this is definitely a better offense than you faced the last 2 weeks. But yeah, I think you like your odds of, I don't know, what, 60-70% of the time your defense is going to get off the field on the first drive, probably.
Yeah.
And then you're set up well for that, halftime scenario, or the wrapping around the half scenario,
Mm-hmm.
where you can maybe stack some points. So yeah, I would probably defer. Also, again, you still have your young quarterback. You still have your young offensive line. Maybe just like feeling the environment from the sideline for a bit before you're
Mm-hmm.
thrust out there might have some value too.
And just going back to your point a second ago, throw the guy who hasn't started a game in that environment out there immediately.
Right, exactly. All right, let's put our money where our mouth is. How do you see this one going? I know you called, I don't know if you called the upset, but you said that this was the most plausible upset on the schedule a few weeks ago. Now that it's time, how do you see it playing out?
I don't. I think South Carolina covers the 7-point dogs. I just between the stats against the Blake Baker defenses and the just how young your offense is still in a game where they're going to have to score stuff. I just see like 24-20 LSU, like 27-21, like a game in the 20s where LSU just has the better quarterback at this point and makes one or two more plays. But I don't think South Carolina gets blown out, and I definitely would not be surprised if it won. And for everyone listening, I picked against them last week and they won. So you guys should be happy I did that.
Yeah, I'm still crushing in our weekly picks. So I picked them to win last week. I didn't think that they were going to win both, but now that we're here,
Yeah, sure. Let it ride.
yeah, I've been picking them to beat LSU since the summer. I look back at my July 2nd article previewing this, and I felt like LSU is losing their Heisman winner at quarterback. They're losing their 2 first-round NFL draft pick wide receivers. And I do think they've shown in the first 2 weeks that they have plenty of talent on offense still on the roster. Although I do think it's been interesting that they haven't been able to run the ball very much at all. Um, I do think that the Blake Baker defense thing scares me the most of my pick. I do think I'm going to adjust my pick down. So over the summer, I picked South Carolina to win 34-30. Basically thought neither team was going to be able to stop each other. It was going to be a little bit of a shootout. I kind of like what you just said, the 24-20, but I'll just have South Carolina on top for 24-20. I think probably you need to win the turnover battle, maybe about +1, +2. Lenore Sellers has almost lost quite a few fumbles over the first couple of weeks.
That's
going to be something scary to watch, but your defense has also caused some good things to happen on the turnover side. So yeah, I'm going to go out on a limb and say they start 3-0, and they will be ranked next week if they do that.
And really, at that point, you're not to look too far ahead, but it's Akron and then a bye week after that. Yeah. You're probably talking about waking up in October with South Carolina football undefeated if you win. If you win tomorrow, not tomorrow, excuse me, win Saturday.
It's a huge opportunity. I mean, I brought up that 2017 Kentucky game earlier for a reason. It feels very much like that. That was the moment in the Will Muschamp era where you're like, oh, is this going to turn around? Is this maybe going to work out? Because you had started 2-0. You had a beatable team at home, the crowd behind you. Everyone wanted, things to work out the right way. You fell flat on your face. You still didn't end up going 9-4 that season, so it wasn't like immediate demise from there or whatever. But yeah, this feels like a golden opportunity. You hope that the team can rise to the challenge, and maybe it's too early to ask that of the freshmen, Lenore Sellers, and really the youth across the board on offense, but feels like a good opportunity if you're going to have one.
No, I'm with you completely. And if you do win this game, I thought the Kentucky game kind of changed the way you looked at the season. You thought maybe it opens up a bowl game. It kind of was one you had to have. if you win this game, and like I said, you're probably going to beat Akron next week. You're 4-0 at the bye week. I think it changes the calculus considerably on how you look at the rest of the year if you find a way to win tomorrow.
I agree. I mean, things start to get really, really interesting. Probably either way during the bye week. This is something to look forward to on GameClockScoop.com. I'm going to kind of do like a look at the schedule based on what we know about all the teams left on it at that point. I mean, not to do it too early right now, but I think Alabama thus far has not looked quite Nick Saban Alabama yet. Maybe they'll get there, but hasn't looked quite the absolute unbeatable juggernaut yet. Oklahoma, I think in
That's the one for
particular,
me.
Oklahoma in particular has looked vulnerable. I mean, their defense is very good, and they're going to win a lot of low scoring games. But I don't see why South Carolina can't be in a low scoring fourth quarter game with them as well. So I'll break down that more during the bye week, and obviously a lot's going to depend on how the next 2 weeks go. Do you want to talk about some other games this weekend? We don't have our full picks put together yet, so I don't actually have all of that, but we can still spotlight a couple of
Sure.
games.
I mean, I got the picks open if you want me to go through them.
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Including one game that's starting now, so we might have to scrub that from the picks. But Arizona State at Texas State right now, a couple 2-0 teams. Arizona State. Oh, I think Steven already did scrub it. Never mind. But if you want to talk about that, it's happening right now.
Arizona State beat a SEC team, Mississippi State last week. What's the line on that? Is it still there?
Arizona State -2. You got to remember, Texas State's a real good G5. They're also 2-0. They blew out UTSA by like 40 last week, and it's at Texas State. And that game literally just kicked off. It's on the first drive right now.
I wish I would have seen that earlier because I probably would have picked Arizona State to cover 2 points. I mean, I do agree with you that Texas State is scrappy, but also they started off their season with a 7-point win over Lamar. So it's I don't know. They're still a G5 team, but we will see. I mean, Arizona State. I'm watching it, or I'm looking at it right now. It looks like they're driving. They're already across the 50 on their first drive.
Okay.
No, he fumbled. Never mind.
Ooh.
Sorry, Arizona State fumbled on the first drive. So scratch everything I said. Go Texas State.
Okay.
No, what's the next game?
Tomorrow night, a top 20 matchup in the Big 12. You've got Arizona at Kansas State. Kansas State favored by 7.5. I don't have the rankings numbers in front of me, but I believe that's 14 versus 20 in the country. And obviously that's a conference game now.
No, you know that. That's right. Yeah, Kansas State. Nice win over Tulane last week, 34-27. Arizona hasn't really been tested yet. They blew out New Mexico, but gave up 39 points. And then they played North Arizona last week. I would probably pick Kansas State in that one just because I think they've shown a little bit more at this point in the season. And I mean, obviously they're the favorite too, but yeah, I'll pick them to cover.
I'm going to fill out your picks here while I have this open. And
yeah, I'll pick them to cover.
Okay, 7.5 at home. Okay,
yeah, I think Arizona's
South Carolina.
I think Arizona's defense is just not strong enough to hold them off long enough. Yeah, I've put money already on South Carolina to cover 7 points. That's a lot of points.
Also at noon, if you're watching South Carolina not at the stadium or just want a second screen. Alabama favored by 16 at Camp Randall Stadium against Wisconsin. That is a weird trip. I can't remember the last time Alabama played north of the Mason-Dixon, but they're going to Madison, and they're favored by 16 against Wisconsin. What do you think?
This was one that I really, really thought about putting some money down on too, for Wisconsin to cover plus 16. I didn't end up doing that. I don't feel good enough about it because I still think Alabama is a lot more talented and could probably run away from them. But Alabama hasn't looked that strong up to this point in the season. I mean, I know the final score we didn't really talk about this, but the final score for UCF looked pretty good, 42-16. But it was like a 3-point game in the fourth quarter.
It's a 1-point game in the fourth quarter.
Yeah. And then Alabama ran away a little bit. So, yeah, I mean, I'm interested to see that one, honestly, but I think Wisconsin at least covers 16 points. What about you?
Okay. I took Bama in the cover just with much better athletes and probably pissed off about last week's performance. Wisconsin also hasn't done anything inspiring either. You got a 28-14 win over Western Michigan where they trailed in the fourth quarter, and a 27-13 win over South Dakota. Also a 16-point spread. Got two in a row with the same number here. Is Boston College getting 16 at Missouri in the only top 25 matchup on Saturday, with the other one being on Friday, if you can believe it.
Yeah.
Mizzou at BC, or BC at Mizzou, excuse me.
So without the season has started for Florida State, I think most people think Florida State's just not all that good, and DJU continues to not be able to get it done as a college quarterback. But isn't there a slight possibility that Boston College is just like kind of all right,
Sure.
kind of good? 16 points is a lot of points for a
Yep.
2-0 team, ranked team. Um, I like Boston College plus 16 there, although I do think
Outright
Missouri
or
will
Mizzou
probably.
still to win outright?
No, I think Mizzou probably
Okay.
wins by like
That's
14.
what I got too. I got Mizzou
Yeah.
winning, but not covering.
Yeah.
We got a 3-pack of rivalry games here, just some games that got moved because of conference realignment that the school still wanted to play. Start with Oregon State in Corvallis. Oregon favored by 14.
Well, that line has moved to Oregon minus 16.5. So obviously the bettors think that Oregon's going to cover that 14. And I'm going to go with them. I mean, I just agree. Oregon has looked pretty good so far. And I think that they have a chance to win the Big 10 or Big 16, Big 18, whatever it is. I know that Boise played them close, but Boise has
I think
an
Boise's just
excellent.
pretty good, man.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. And they have an excellent running game that can kind of keep them in any game. So,
Yeah, I'm with you. I got the Ducks to cover on the road. Stick with the rivalries. Number 2 on these. Washington State this weekend. Washington at home, favored by 4.5. Washington State looked pretty good against Texas Tech last week, but I think Texas Tech just might not be very good. You're going on the road now to play Washington. What say you at 4.5?
I mean, that's tough. It's Washington's first real test since DeBoer has moved on. Like you said, Washington State played pretty well. They did give up 30 to Portland State, but they scored 70 against Portland State. So probably going to be fun. Probably going to be a lot of offense in this one. I will pick Washington State to cover plus 4.5. But this feels like one that could go either way. Last week, by the way, I picked Arkansas to cover 8.5, I think, or
I think they
7.5.
did technically, right?
Whatever
they
it
lost by 8
was.
in overtime, though, right?
Whatever. Okay, so then I picked them to cover 7.5, and
yeah, that was a really bad beat. Oh.
They looked great, yeah, the whole time, and then lose by 8 in overtime. So Vegas knows things sometimes, I guess. All right, what's next?
All right, one of my favorite games in college football that should be played every year, no matter what conference these two teams are in. West Virginia at Pitt, backyard brawl. Pitt had a miracle win last week, down 27-7 in the fourth quarter to Cincinnati, come back to win. West Virginia lost to Penn State, had a get-right game last week at home. West Virginia favored by 2.5 on the road at Pitt.
It doesn't feel good.
I mean, there's no way to bet a backyard brawl if you're confident. But
I probably am going to pick the home team to cover there, but yeah, it doesn't feel good either way. West Virginia got annihilated by Penn State, so I don't know. Let's go home team.
I picked West Virginia. I know what happened to West Virginia week 1, but I can't get out of my head that Pitt was getting run off the field by a not good Cincinnati team for 3.5 quarters and just by an act of God came back and won the game by 1 point. I don't think Pitt's very good. But
are they not good? Cincinnati?
I mean, they weren't great last year.
Eli Holstein, though.
True. It's a backyard brawl. It's going to be fun. There's probably going to be a fight. It'll come down to the fourth quarter. It's fun. I think 2.5 is about right. I'd probably stick that there either side.
Yeah, this is a sneaky, really good week. This is a good week to sit and watch football all day.
Okay, an early anxiety bowl between two teams who are 1-1 but 0-1 against power or FBS opponents. Texas A&M favored by 3.5 at Florida. Billy Napier's last stand ?
I picked Texas A&M to win and cover. And yeah, I think we're getting near the end there. But maybe those kids really, really like them and they rise up against a beatable Texas A&M team, and it's at home. So, but yeah, I'm going to take a Texas A&M into the points until I see Florida have a pulse.
Yeah, I can't argue with that at all. I picked A&M as well. I don't think A&M's great, but I think that defense is pretty good. I don't think Florida's offense is much, even with the quarterback change. So I'll take it's only 3.5. I know it's on the road, but All right, we got two more here. Night slate's a little bit lacking. We got a lot of good. All three of those rivalry games are at 3:30, so you got a good channel flipping in the afternoon. Plus, A&M Florida's also at 3:30. But night slate, Georgia favored by 23.5 at Kentucky. Keeping in mind South Carolina beat Kentucky by 25 on that field last week. Any chance Kentucky bounces back, or are they just flat and Georgia beats them by 50?
I like Kentucky to cover. I still think they're a well-coached team. It's at Kentucky. The bettors seem to agree with me because the spread is now Georgia minus 22.5. So it has moved a little bit in that direction. Yeah, I think last week was a weird game. I do think things are not going to get any easier for and why can't I think of his Vandergriff right now going against his former team and a pretty salty defensive front. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like this is just one of those get ugly and get weird. And I don't know, maybe Georgia wins by 14, 17, something like that.
I can see that. I'm just not picking Kentucky right now, just on principle from what I watched last week in person. Last one here. It's a Big 12 matchup. It's 2-2-0 teams. Might be kind of fun. I don't think we know a lot about either of these teams yet, but TCU is playing UCF. Just had it up here. Hold on. At TCU, TCU is a 2-point favorite at home.
So that one swung completely the other way. UCF's a -1 now.
Across the bridge.
That I'm just really excited to watch this game. I have no idea who's going to win it. Could either / both of these teams compete for the Big 12 championship?
Absolutely, yeah. It's a big game. Like it counts in the conference standings as an automatic bid to the playoff for the conference winner, obviously. Like it's kind of a big game.
Yeah, I tend to think TCU is probably a little bit better on defense. So if I have to pick, I'll pick them to cover the one. But it's going to be a fun game, and I wouldn't go anywhere near this with any money.
Yeah. So you pick TCU there?
Yeah.
Yeah, same. One more game that's not on the sheet, so I won't ask you to pick it, but I'm curious about because it goes into the conversation we were having before we started doing the picks is Tulane at Oklahoma. Tulane pushed Kansas State very hard last week. It came down to the final play. Oklahoma's offense looks kind of broken right now. It's in Norman, but I don't know. I think Tulane might have a chance to make that weird. Oklahoma's favored by 13, even though we don't have that on the pick sheet.
No, but I've picked it in my own personal life, and I did pick Tulane to cover because 13 is a lot of points against
for an offense that can't score.
Oklahoma, offense that hasn't shown a whole lot of spark so far. And I think Tulane has a pretty good offense themselves. So even though Oklahoma's defense has been stifling, I think Tulane's probably a little better on offense than anyone they've seen so far this year. So I'm excited to watch that.
It's a Rumble in the Rockies weekend too. Colorado at Colorado State at 7:30. Forgot that's in the night slot too.
Yeah, Colorado. I think it's a 7-point favorite. I would probably take them in the points, but they looked bad last week. We answered the question on the what was it? Would you say the very movable force in the?
Exactly. It's Marcus Satterfield's offense is still better right now than Deion's defense.
Well, it was for a half, right? It very much reminded me of a old South Carolina game where it's like, wow, everything's clicking, and then it's like, well, now that the opening script is over, I guess we can't do anything. I don't think they scored again in the second half, so that was a weird one. Anyway, any other final thoughts before we get out of here?
No, just everybody stay safe this weekend. Have fun. Get there early. You're not going to want to be slamming your steering wheel in traffic on Bluff Road at 10 o'clock. Enjoy the weekend and see what happens.
Yeah, and I will say I have seen a lot more of you watching and listening, and we really appreciate that. Make sure you hit subscribe wherever you like to listen so that we keep showing up in your feed. We'll be back here Sunday morning, and we usually, so far this season, have been the first Gamecock podcast to go live after a game. I mean, I think people do some, don't sue me or whatever. I think some people do their little post game, whatever, but we do an official podcast on Sunday morning. So we'll be back there on Sunday morning. Till then, we'll see you.